Okay, access control. We talked about depth and defense. The first thing that we're going to do is do all of our assets and everything in there. Then we start setting up our access control. There's different ways of doing access control. You're going to see the CIA, which this is not the government organization, but it is called the CIA triad, and you should be familiar with this in the security realm. What that is the confidentiality, integrity, and availability as a pie chart you see over here, with confidentiality being only authorized individuals, entities, or processes can access the sensitive information. Integrity being that your protection of the data from unauthorized alteration or alteration, I'm sorry. And then availability, unauthorized users must have uninterrupted access to network resources and data that they require. So it's a balancing act between all three of these. In a zero trust security, this is going to be a comprehensive approach to securing all access across all networks, applications, and environments. This approach helps secure users and end devices such as APIs or IoTs, Internet of Things, microservices, etc. The principle of zero trust approach is never trust anybody, always verify. So never trust, always verify. Pretty particular phrase that you want to memorize based on zero trust. And what that means is that in that framework, it's going to help prevent unauthorized access, contain any kind of breaches, and reduce the risk of an attack's lateral movement throughout the network. Any place at which an access control decision is required should be considered a perimeter. The idea is that you lock everything down and then start adding access as to who gets where. This is a much tougher approach than everything's wide open, let's start locking things down kind of thing. It's great, but it also means that you have to do that balance back here for availability and that you don't take down a bunch of users while you're setting it up. So there's three pillars of zero trust for the workforce itself. These are the people or the people that work with the work applications of their personal or corporate managed devices. You have zero trust for workloads, which is concerned about the applications running in a cloud, the data center, or other virtualized environments. And then you have the workplace itself, which is all the devices like Internet of Things connected to the enterprise network, user endpoints, physical machines, virtual machine servers, printers, cameras, etc. As such, an organization must implement proper access controls to protect all of those. There's two ways of doing that with access controls. You can have discretionary access control, or DAC. This is going to be the least restrictive model, in which allows users to control access to their data as owners of that data. It may use some access control lists or other methods to verify which specific users or groups have access to the information. You also have mandatory access control, or MAC. This is going to apply to the strictest form of access control and is used in the military or mission critical applications. It assigns security level labels to information, not just data itself from the end user, and enables users to either access that information based on their security level clearance. You can also have RBAC, or roles-based security. This is usually where access decisions are based on individual role or responsibility within the organization. You can also have attribute-based access control, or ABAC. This is where an object has different access, assessing the resource itself, primarily focusing on environmental factors regarding how that object is accessed. You can also have RBAC, not to be confused with role, is rule-based access. This is where security staff sets specific rules and conditions at which associated data can be accessed. This may be something like specific permitted IP addresses or certain protocols or other known conditions, also known as rule-based. It can be described as rule-based RBAC as well. You also have time-based access control. This is where networks are based on the time and day. So specifically, this is used for backups, but you could also make sure that people only have access to network resources during the 8 to 3 business time or 8 to 5 business time. They cannot access it after hours. All right, so you should be familiar with AAA, which is your authentication, authorization, and accounting protocol. This provides necessary framework to enable scalable access security. So the idea here is that you mandate some kind of accounting system, which is going to track who logged in, when, where, what, and why into a particular system. So authentication, and you guys are going to want to know these for the exam. Authentication is going to be you're established using a username or password combination, a challenge and response, tokens, two-factor authentication, anything like that is going to be the authentication section. Authorization is after that user is authenticated, what authorization service is going to provide them access to those resources. For example, that user only has access to host server XYZ using SSH only. And then accounting is going to be keeping track of all the records, which is going to assess the time the resource was accessed and any changes that were made on it. It's basically the one that keeps track of all the changes. So user accessed host XYZ using SSH for 15 minutes at a given time frame. When you guys start working on the last half of this course, this is what you're going to be doing, is being able to analyze those logs, figure out when the user popped in, what they accessed, did they have permissions to access that, how long they were on there. So the concept is similar to using a credit card indicated by the figure. The credit card itself identifies who can use it, how much that user can spend, and keeps track of the account of items that the user spent the money on. So who are you? You got your name, your credit card number. On your authorization, how much you're allowed to spend. And then the accounting section would be, what did you spend it on? All right, so AAA authentication, there's a couple ways to set this up. From a Cisco perspective, you can do what's called local AAA authentication. This is self-contained authentication because it authenticates users against a locally stored database of usernames and passwords. Local AAA is ideal for small networks. So if you're running a small mom and pop shop, it may make sense for you just to use local AAA authentication. However, as you're using bigger, you want to connect to a router, for example. So it's going to prompt for a username and password. That router does the authentication on a local database on the router itself, and that user is then able to access the information. Server-based authentication is going to contain usernames and passwords for all users. It's ideal for medium to large networks because you can then use that same authentication server for multiple services. So in this case, you try to connect to the router sends that authentication back to the server authenticates it and sends it on back to the remote client. You could also have centralized AAA. This is more scalable and manageable than local authentication. For example, if you're here on campus, if every time you log into Blackboard, you'll notice you get kicked to that separate screen, which is the CAS, or Central Authentication Service. That same service that you log into is the same for Blackboard, used to be Tiger Central, Tiger Tracks, all of those use the same authentication service. Now Workday for most of that. You can leverage what's called LDAP or Active Directory. So Active Directory is going to be a Windows-based system primarily. You also have LDAP, which is considered a lightweight directory access protocol, typically deployed on Linux servers, but you could also do it on Windows. Devices themselves can also use things like Radius, which is a remote authentication dial-in user service. A lot of you guys are probably too young to have the dial-up internet days that used most Radius services. So when you dialed up with the username and password, that typically authenticated with a Radius server or a terminal server as well. You could also have what's called TACACS. This is commonly for Cisco devices, in which you have a terminal access controller to authenticate yourself coming in from the backside. So functionality between TACACS and Radius, this were the two main protocols for Cisco. In TACACS, you have functionality of separate authentication, authorization, and accounting functions. It allows for more modularity of the security server implementation. In a Radius system, it combines all of those two, but separates accounting, which is less flexible in terms of implementation than TACACS. In TACACS, it's mostly Cisco only. Radius is an open standard. TACACS is going to run on TCP port 49, where Radius will run on 1812, 1813, 1645, or 1646, depending on how it's deployed. Notice that that's UDP versus TCP. In a protocol of CHAP, or your challenge handshake authentication protocol, it's bidirectional in TACACS, where it's unidirectional with Radius. You can see in the confidentiality, TACACS is going to encrypt the entire packet but leaves the standard TACACS header. Radius is only going to encrypt the passwords packet going through there. The remainder of the packet is unencrypted, including the username, authorized services, the accounting is all unprotected. So obviously, TACACS is going to be very limited in accounting, where Radius is very extensive. It's going to send a lot of detailed information. So it's kind of a local balance between which one you're using for what purpose. All right, so centralized AAA is going to enable the use of accounting method. Accounting records are collected from all end devices and then sent to a centralized repository, which simplifies auditing a user's actions. For example, I don't want to go dig through all the server logs you went through, the firewall logs and the VPN logs individually to see, okay, you connected to the VPN, then I got to go to the server logs, find out when you access the server, that kind of stuff. We want that all centralized so that when I search for Dalton coming on my network, I can see when he hit the VPN, when he hit the server, all the other services. So AAA authentication is going to be coming in with logs. It's useful for security auditing. And in a widely deployed accounting, it combines all that AAA authentication.
Do you have that? Is that the current network so you can access whenever the student logs on?
Yes. Yeah. So like when you guys hop onto your student account on the wireless, or you access TigerNet Guest, all of that gets centrally logged so that we can actually see when you logged it. And so when you log in with your student account on, say, the TigerLand or the TigerNet Wi-Fi for student, we get your MAC address. We know when you logged in, when you authenticated, when you left the campus network, that kind of thing. Accounting provides more than just security and authentication. AAA servers keep a detailed log of exactly what authenticated user does on given devices. So you have tons of different accounting information. I'm not going to go through each line of these, but the idea is that we're going to capture a ton of information and send it back to a central log system. So as a summary, the thing that you want to know about this module is the CIA triad. This is the three main components: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. You have a zero trust, which is a comprehensive approach to securing everything on the network, including the network, applications, and the environments a student or a user uses. You have the principle of zero trust, which is never trust, always verify. The pillars of the trust are for the workforce, zero trust for workloads, and zero trust for the workplace. In that approach, any place at which a user access control decision is required should be considered a perimeter. There's tons of different access control methods, whether you use a DAC, a MAC, RBAC, ABAC, etc. And a network must be designed to control who's allowed to connect to it, what they're allowed to do once they're connected, and at what point it's being logged as to what they're doing. You can use AAA systems. Again, you'll need to know that acronym of authentication, authorization, and accounting. Cisco itself provides two common methods of AAA, which is local authentication and server-based authentication. In more of a centralized manner, you can use a little bit more local A, where it's preferred to use a larger scale. Devices that communicate with a centralized AAA may use something like Radius, or they may use TACACS. The centralized authentication, accounts for collecting all those logs and information back. All right. Anybody have any questions over accounting? Yeah.